Do you want to know why we lost the war? A seasoned chicken veteran croaked, his mandibles clicking with excitement as he sipped his drink. I'll tell you why we lost. We never had a chance against these psychotic primates. The young journalist leaned forward, her mustache quivering with interest. She had heard rumors about the infamous conflict between humans and Katia, but eyewitness accounts were rare. Most veterans preferred to forget about it. But the Empire had military superiority. She began. Military superiority? The veteran gave a sharp, rattling laugh. Let me explain something about the people in the war. You think you understand violence, you think you understand combat. You don't know anything. He took another long sip, his complex eyes reflecting the dim light of the space station bar. Here's what you need to understand about humans: they turned war into an art form long before they left their gravity pit. While we were perfecting plasma weapons and energy shields, do you know what they were doing? They found more and more sophisticated ways to kill each other with sharpened pieces of metal and advanced explosives. But it's so primitive. The journalist protested. Primitive? He slammed his drink down on the counter. Let me tell you about primitiveness. During our first encounter with human forces, we deployed advanced combat formations, perfect geometric shapes optimized by our best military AI. Do you know what they did? They looked at our perfect formations and laughed. And then they started throwing stones at us. Stones. Not just ordinary stones, but tungsten rods dropped from orbit. Can you imagine what happens when you drop a telephone pole, the size of an entire block, from space? They called it rods from God, pure kinetic energy, no radiation, no intricate energy signatures to detect them. Just death from above. The journalist's mustache drooped. But we had numerical superiority. Numerical superiority? That harsh laugh again. Oh, that's the most interesting thing. We thought so too. We had 10 times fewer of them. But do you know what people are really good at? To fight in the minority. They have a whole mythology built around it. They turned it into a sport. While we were developing combat doctrines based on pure logic and efficiency, they were creating things called video games that simulated combat in increasingly complex ways. By the time we collided, their civilians had spent more time thinking about tactical combat scenarios than our military strategists. But this is just a simulation, the journalist objected. Of course, a real fight. This is exactly what they have been preparing for all their lives. Every human child grows up playing war games, capture the flag, paintball, laser tag. They turn combat into entertainment, and that's not the worst part. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. The scariest thing is their creativity. We thought we understood war, that we had brought it to science, ideal formations, optimal weapon configurations, carefully calculated risk assessments. But people look at the battlefield and see opportunities. During the Battle of Imus and Tori, we cornered their fleet. The numbers were superior, the position was excellent, the firepower was superior. By all tactical calculations, they were finished. Do you know what they did? They deliberately blew up the antimatter reactor's own containment fields to create a huge electromagnetic pulse. They disabled their own systems along with ours. And then, while both fleets were immobilized, they landed boarding parties using primitive chemical missiles. He shuddered. Do you know what it's like to be on an advanced warship surrounded by the most advanced technology in the galaxy and watch people in mechanical suits cut through your hull with thermal spears? Not with plasma cutters, not with energy beams, but just with very hot metal. And they were singing at the same time. They were singing some kind of ancient military song, Blood on Parachutes, I think. Something about how their parachutes don't open. They have songs about how their soldiers die horribly, and they sing them to boost morale. What kind of view is this? The journalist's mustache trembled nervously. But their technical limitations? That's where everyone gets it wrong. We thought their primitive technology was a weakness. But people don't look at technology the way we do. For them, technology is just another tool in the kit. They will use plasma rifles together with ballistic weapons, quantum computers together with mechanical analog systems. Everything that works, everything that helps to complete the task. He spread his hands. Do you know what really proves my point? Their language. They have this expression, there are many ways to skin a cat. The first time I heard this, I had to ask for clarification. It turns out that this is an idiom about problem solving. But think about it for a second, they have a common expression about there being many ways to skin an animal. That's the kind we were dealing with. But we had better ships, better weapons. Better ships? Let me tell you about human ships. While we built elegant vessels with perfect symmetry and optimal energy distribution, humans essentially bolted engines to giant slabs of metal. Their ships weren't elegant, they were brutal, over-engineered monsters built to take a hit and keep fighting. They didn't even bother to use proper energy shields on their smaller craft, they just slapped on layers and layers of armor and decided that was enough. He took another sip. And their weapons. Sure, we had better energy weapons, but you know what humans brought to the fight? Everything. Literally everything. Energy weapons, projectile weapons, kinetic weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons. If something could hurt someone, they weaponized it. They even weaponized information, stealth warfare, psychological operations. They didn't just want to defeat us militarily, they wanted to break our will to fight. They studied our culture, our psychology, our social structures, and then they used that knowledge against us. They spread rumors, stories, urban legends, created doubt, fear, uncertainty. By the end of the war, we had troops surrendering because they heard that people could smell fear and would kill you faster if you didn't fight back. The journalist's mustache twitched quickly. But that's funny. Of course it was funny. But that's the point, people in war don't care about funny things, they care about effective things. If something works, they'll use it, no matter how weird or primitive it may seem. He drained his glass. But you want to know the real reason why we lost? The absolute fundamental reason why you can't win a war? Because they enjoy it. Not the killing, not the dying. Well, some of them enjoy that, and they're terrifying. It's the challenge, the problem solving, the strategy and tactics. They treat war like a game, like a puzzle to be solved. And they're very good at solving puzzles. He motioned to the bartender for another drink. You know what they did after we surrendered? They invited our military brass to something called a paintball tournament. They said it would be good for post-war relations. So there we were, the highest-ranking surviving members of our military, running around getting paintballs shot at by laughing men who treated the whole thing like a party. It's disturbing, the reporter said. Disturbing is an understatement. You know what their civilian population did during the war? Built models of our ships and equipment for fun. Created simulated battles in their video games. Wrote fiction about the various ways the war could have gone. Their entire society is wired to think, analyze, and enjoy conflict. He leaned back, his compound eyes reflecting the starlight visible through the station's window. So you want to know why we lost the war? Because we fought soldiers, and they fought warriors. We fought with science, and they fought with art. We fought because we had to, and they fought because they had waited their entire lives for the chance to prove themselves against an alien enemy. The journalist was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Finally, she asked, do you think they will ever change, become more civilized? The veteran gave a dark chuckle. Civilized? They are civilized. That's what makes them dangerous. They've managed to maintain their warrior spirit while building a sophisticated civilization. They have ballet dancers who practice martial arts, scientists who play war games in their spare time, politicians who hunt for sport. Their entire culture is built on the idea that you can be civilized and dangerous at the same time. He gestured to a group of people across the bar who were happily arm wrestling and placing bets. Look at them right now. They're just having fun, competing in a friendly contest. But I've seen what happens when they're provoked, when their worlds, their people, their way of life are threatened. They stop being civilized very quickly. And then you understand why every species that has ever fought them has ended up dead or surrendering. And why does that happen? Because humans don't just practice war, they don't just study it, they don't just enjoy it. They transcend it. They turn violence into an art, conflict into a dance, battle into a symphony. They are the gods of war, and everyone else is just fiddling with basic arithmetic while they compose grand operas of destruction. He finished his drink and stood up, his mandibles clicking softly. So the next time someone tells you that humans are primitive because they still use projectile weapons, or backward because they maintain standing armies, or uncivilized because they love combat sports, remember this conversation. Remember that every piece of primitive technology they keep around has a use that our advanced civilization has never even thought of. Remember that their backward military traditions have been honed by millennia of constant warfare. And remember that their uncivilized love of competition is what drives them to constantly innovate and improve. The veteran headed for the door. Oh, and one more thing, if you ever find yourself in combat with a human, surrender immediately. Because if you don't, they'll take what you're fighting, figure out how it works, improve on it, and use it against you. And they'll probably hum a funny song while they do it. With that, he clicked his mandibles again and walked away, leaving the young journalist to ponder the implications of discovering a species that had turned war into an art form, and why that made them the most feared warriors in the known galaxy. The people at the end of the bar were now singing something about the old Duke of York having 10,000 men. The journalist decided she didn't want to know the rest of the lyrics, some questions were best left unanswered. The journalist was about to leave when one of the people from the singing group approached the bar next to her. He was wearing a uniform that looked like a full-dress military uniform, although the profusion of multicolored ribbons and medals seemed almost vulgar to her Kursk sensibilities. "I couldn't help but overhear part of your conversation," he said casually, ordering something called whiskey. "Your friend was right about some things, but he missed the most interesting part." Professional curiosity got the better of the journalist. "The most interesting part?" The man grinned, and she noted with mild alarm that people showed their teeth in amusement, a gesture that would signal imminent violence in most civilized species. "Oh, yes, you see, your veteran friend only saw us during the war. It's like watching the finale of a play without having seen any of the rehearsals." He sat down on a stool, and the journalist felt herself involuntarily distanced by his casual confidence. "You fought in the war?" she asked. "Nah, I was just a kid then. But I studied it. We all studied it. It's required training now, how not to start an interstellar war 101. He chuckled. Although, to be honest, it should be called a how to end one really quickly if someone else starts it. He gestured at the stars visible through the window. "Look out there. You know what most species see out there? Resources, territory, strategic positions. You know what humans see? Every science fiction story we've ever written, every space battle we've ever imagined, every heroic last stand and desperate gambit, every cunning strategy we've ever devised." The man's expression turned serious. "But you want to know the biggest secret, the thing that really makes us dangerous. What is it? We don't really want to fight. We prepare for war constantly, obsessively, but our greatest heroes are those who find ways to avoid it. We celebrate commanders who win without fighting, diplomats who prevent conflict, leaders who keep the peace." He finished his drink. "That's what makes us gods of war. We understand it well enough to know when not to use it. Your veteran was right when he said we've turned war into an art form, but he missed the point. Like any true artist, we know that our greatest work often comes when we choose not to create at all." The man stood, straightening his uniform. "That's why we're here now, drinking together in a bar, instead of shooting each other in space. Because as good as we are at making war, we're even better at finding ways not to make war." He smiled again, and this time the reporter didn't flinch at the sight of his teeth. "Just remember, the only thing people love more than a good fight is a good reason not to fight." With that, he turned back to his comrades, who were now trying to sing something about 99 bottles of beer on the wall. The reporter looked at her notes, then at the stars, and finally understood why humans were considered gods of war. Not because they were the best at fighting, but because they understood better than anyone why you shouldn't fight. She had her story, but somehow she suspected that it was not the story she had originally intended to write. Behind her, the people began singing again, this time something about a buffalo soldier in the heart of America. She decided that some songs, like some species, were best appreciated from a safe distance, preferably behind several layers of reinforced armor, just in case. As the reporter considered the human officer's words, she noticed something strange in the atmosphere of the bar. The ambient noise had changed, the singing had stopped. She turned to see what had caused the change, and saw a group of people watching a news broadcast on a video screen. Breaking news: pirates have attacked a civilian transport near the Carina Nebula. Not just any transport, a refugee ship carrying children from the war-torn Riel sector. The change in the people was immediate and dramatic. Gone were the smiles, the casual poses, the friendly banter. Their expressions turned stony, and the reporter felt a primal shudder run through her ribcage. This, she realized, was what the veteran had been trying to warn her about. Another person approached her desk, a woman this time, dressed in civilian clothes but moving with an unmistakable military bearing. Without asking permission, she sat down. "Do you want to know why we are actually gods of war?" the woman asked, her voice quiet but tense. "Watch what happens next." "What do you mean?" "These pirates, they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They broke one of the fundamental rules of humanity." "You have rules for war?" The woman's laugh was nothing like the friendly laughter of old humans. It reminded the reporter of the sound of cracking ice. "We have rules for everything. Codes of conduct, laws of war, Geneva Conventions, rules of engagement. But some rules," she nodded at the screen, "some rules are written into our DNA." The reporter watched as the people in the bar began calling, texting, coordinating with an efficiency that seemed inconsistent with their former carefreeness. "You see, most species think we're dangerous because we fight well," the woman continued. "But that's not true at all. We're dangerous because we have a line that can't be crossed. And when someone crosses that line," she smiled, and the reporter suddenly understood why some species considered human smiles a threat. "The veteran you spoke to, he saw us in a conventional war. The officer knows our history, our training, our potential, but none of them showed you what happens when humanity gets really angry." The screen showed reports of several naval vessels changing course toward the Carina Nebula. Not just human ships, but vessels from every major power in the sector. The reporter's whiskers twitched in surprise. "What do they mean?" "Alliances," the woman explained. "That's another thing we're good at. When humanity goes to war, we take more than just weapons, we take friends, allies, partners. Because we learned a long time ago that the strongest warrior is not the one with the biggest guns, but the one with the most people willing to stand beside him." She pointed to the screen. "Right now, every nation that signed the Terran Accords is mobilizing. Not because they have to, but because they know that if they ever need help, humanity will remember who stood beside us. But they're just pirates." "Just pirates." The woman's expression darkened. "They attacked children, they attacked refugees, they attacked the helpless, they attacked the innocent. Do you understand what that means in human terms?" The reporter shook her head. "It means the rules just changed. When we fight a normal war, we have limits, we have boundaries, we have ethics. But when someone attacks children," she pointed to the screen, where more ships were appearing, "then you see why they call us the gods of war." The human officer who had spoken to her earlier appeared next to their table. "The task force has been assembled. We are receiving reports of similar groups forming in 3 other sectors. Someone has been watching these pirates for a long time." "Of course we have," the woman replied. We never forget anything." The journalist's professional instincts sharpened. "Never forget? What?" The two humans exchanged glances. The officer spoke first. 3 years ago, these same pirates attacked another transport. We couldn't prove it was them, but we knew. So we watched, waited, gathered information, built networks, made friends. And now, the journalist asked, the woman smiled, terrifying in its calm. Now they have given us a reason, an excuse, a cause. And that's when people are most dangerous, when they can act with complete moral authority. The first reports of clashes appeared on the screen. The reporter watched in amazement as ships from a dozen different types moved in perfect coordination, cutting off escape routes, isolating the pirate vessels, performing maneuvers that seemed impossible for such a disparate fleet. How do they work so well? Because we trained them, the officer replied proudly. After the war, we shared our knowledge, our methods, our experience. Not all of it, of course, we're not stupid. But enough, because we realized that the only thing better than fighting well is having allies who fight well. And who trust you. Trust is a weapon more powerful than any battleship, the woman added. The reporter watched as the operation unfolded with ruthless efficiency. Within hours, the pirates were surrounded, the refugee ship was safe. And wait, she said. They're asking the pirates to surrender? Of course they do, the woman said. That's rule number 1 of human warfare, always offer a chance to surrender, always provide a way out. Because the goal is not to destroy your enemy. No, the officer replied. The goal is to make sure they never want to fight you again. And sometimes the best way to do that is to show mercy when you have every right not to. The reporter watched as most of the pirate ships surrendered. Some tried to fight, some tried to flee, but none succeeded. And here's why, the woman said, standing up. We are the gods of war. Not because we are the strongest, the most advanced, or the most brutal. But because we understand that true strength does not come from winning battles. It's about choosing which battles are worth fighting, and how to win them in a way that prevents future battles from happening again. She adjusted her civilian jacket, and the reporter suddenly realized why her demeanor seemed military. The woman's clothes might have been civilian, but the way she carried herself screamed admiral. One final lesson about men at war, the admiral said. We're not just good at making wars, we're good at ending them. Sometimes with violence, sometimes with mercy, sometimes with a combination of both, but always with a purpose. The officer nodded in agreement. The pirates thought they could get away with it because they didn't understand the rules of humanity. They thought that because we sang and drank and played games, we weren't serious about war. They forgot, the admiral concluded, that gods can be both merciful and terrible at the same time. And humanity had plenty of practice at both. The reporter looked at the screen, where the combined fleet was escorting the captured pirate ships to the nearest starbase. The refugee ship was being cared for by medical vessels from 3 different species, and humanity had demonstrated once again why they were considered gods of war, not through superior technology, not through greater numbers, not even through superior tactics, but through something far more powerful, the ability to unite others in a common goal, to fight with both fury and restraint, and to turn potential enemies into long-term allies. The people in the bar had resumed their singing, but this time it was different. This time they were singing something older, deeper, more meaningful, a song about amazing grace, and how sweet is the sound. The reporter had heard the people sing several times that evening, but this was the first time she understood why they did it. Sometimes even the gods need to be reminded of mercy. The pirate incident had drawn quite a crowd to the station bar. The reporter noticed a group of young aliens, students by their signs, gathered around an older man dressed in what looked like ceremonial fatigues. Unlike the active-duty soldiers, his uniform was decorated with old metals and faded insignia that testified to conflicts long past. Is it true, one of the students asked, about the Great Memorial? The older man's eyes crinkled at the corners. Ah, you ask about how we remember our wars. The reporter felt herself getting closer, her tablet in hand. It was an aspect of human warfare she hadn't thought about, how they preserved their military history. On Earth, the veteran began, there is a wall, a simple thing really. Black stone, polished to a mirror shine. There are names on it, just names, tens of thousands of names. People come there to touch the names, to make imprints on paper, to leave flowers and medals and letters. But why? Asked the young Cento. Why remember the dead like this? Because every name has a story, replied the older man. Every one of them. We don't just remember our victories. We remember our defeats, our sacrifices, our mistakes. That's another thing that makes us different. The admiral the reporter had been talking to earlier appeared silently, taking the seat next to her. The older veteran nodded his head in acknowledgement before continuing. Most species build monuments to their victories, statues of great generals, memorials to decisive battles. We do that too, but... He paused, sipping his drink. We also build monuments to our failures, our losses, the cost of war itself. But why? Asked another student. Why remember defeat? Because that's how they learn, the admiral interjected. That's how they make sure it doesn't happen again. Every name on that wall is a lesson, written in blood. The older veteran nodded. We have a saying, those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. But for people, memory isn't just facts and figures, it's stories, emotions, connections. He pulled a small metal object on a chain from his pocket. This belonged to my grandfather. He fought in what we call World War II, just one of millions. When I was a child, he didn't tell me about victories, he told me about the friends he lost, the horrors he saw, the cost of war. It seems counterproductive, one of the students observed. Shouldn't it scare warriors away? The admiral laughed softly. You think so? But it has the opposite effect. Because when humans go to war, they carry more than just weapons. They carry memories, stories, lessons learned in blood and fire. Every human warrior, the veteran continued, carries the burden of those who came before them. Not just their victories, but their sacrifices, their losses, their pain. It makes us better warriors, because it makes us understand the cost of war. The journalist's whiskers flickered with interest. Is that why humans seem to approach war differently than other species? Partly, the admiral said. Most species see war as a means to an end, as a tool, as a necessity. We see it as history, still being written. Every battle, every conflict, every war, are chapters in a book that began when the first man picked up a stone to protect his tribe. And we're still writing it, the veteran added. Still adding chapters, still learning, still remembering. One of the students pointed to the news feed, where updates on the pirate incident were still appearing. Is that why everyone reacted so quickly? Because of the memories, the admiral said accurately. When we saw that refugee ship being attacked, we didn't just see the current event. We saw every refugee ship that had ever been attacked. Every innocent that had ever been harmed. Every time someone thought they could prey on the weak with impunity. We remember, the veteran said quietly. We always remember. But that's not all, the admiral continued. We also remember every time someone stood up to protect the innocent. Every time different species came together for a common goal. Every time mercy was shown when revenge would have been easier. The veteran held up his grandfather's dog tags. They remind me of something important about human warfare. We don't fight because we love war. We fight because we remember what happens when good men do nothing. And that, the admiral added, is why we train so hard, why we prepare so thoroughly, why we build alliances and share knowledge. Because we remember every time we were unprepared, every time we were too slow, every time we failed to protect those who needed protecting. The reporter glanced at her notes, then at the assembled group. So men are gods of war not just because of how you fight, but because of how you remember, the veteran concluded. How we learn, how we bear the brunt of every conflict, every loss, every victory, every sacrifice. The admiral stood, adjusting her civilian clothes. That's why those pirates never stood a chance. Not just because we had superior numbers or better coordination, but because every man who responded carried the memory of every other time someone had tried to prey on the innocent. And the mercy offered to survivors. And because we remember, the veteran said. We remember what happens when victory becomes revenge, when justice becomes cruelty. We remember because we must. Because if we forget, we risk becoming what we fight. The news feed reported that the last of the pirate ships were being escorted back to the starbase. The refugee ship was safely docked, and its passengers were being tended to by a multi-species medical team. So you see, the veteran concluded. Being a god of war is not about being the best at fighting, it's about being the best at remembering why we fight, when to fight, and most importantly, when not to fight. And when we do fight, the Admiral added, we carry with us every lesson, every story, every sacrifice that came before. It makes us better warriors, not because it makes us stronger, faster, or more skilled, but because it makes us understand the true cost of war. And that understanding makes us more terrible in battle and more compassionate in victory, the veteran concluded. The student silently absorbed this information. The reporter looked at her notes, realizing that she now had enough material for not just one article, but a whole series. Behind them, the people in the bar began to sing again, but this time it was different. A slow, mournful tune about poppies growing in fields where soldiers had once fallen. The reporter understood now. Humans were not gods of war just because of how they fought. They were gods of war because they never forgot why they fought and what it cost. The station was buzzing with activity, the pirate incident had attracted a lot of attention, and the bar was crowded with customers. The reporter noticed a group of young aliens, students, huddled around an older man dressed in a dress uniform. Unlike active duty soldiers, this man's uniform was decorated with old medals and faded insignia that spoke of conflicts long past. Is it true what they say about the Great Memorial? One of the students asked. Oh, you want to know how we honor the memory of wars, the old man said with a smile, which attracted the journalist's attention. She got ready to take notes. She was curious about how people preserved their military history. There is a wall on Earth, the old veteran began, a very simple structure, a piece of black stone, polished to a shine. Names are written on it, tens of thousands of names. People come there to touch them, to make imprints on paper, to leave flowers and awards. But why? The young sentinel inquired. Why remember the dead? Because behind every name there is a story, the old man answered. Each name has its own. We remember not only our victories, but also our defeats, our victims, our mistakes. This is what distinguishes us from others. The Admiral, with whom the journalist had spoken earlier, silently joined them. The old man nodded to her before continuing. Many species build monuments to their victories, erect statues to great generals, erect memorials to battles. We do that too. The veteran paused and took a sip of his drink, but we also build monuments to our failures, our losses, the cost of war. But why? One of the students asked. Why remember defeats? That's how we learn, the Admiral chimed in, that's how we ensure it doesn't happen again. Every name on this wall is a lesson written in blood. The old man nodded. We have a saying, those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. But for us, memory isn't just facts and figures, it's stories, feelings, connections. He pulled a metal object on a chain from his pocket. It belonged to my grandfather. He fought in World War II, just one of millions. When he was a child, he told me not of victories, but of friends he had lost, of horrors he had witnessed, and of the cost of war. It seems counterproductive, one student remarked, doesn't it demotivate soldiers? The Admiral laughed softly. As if. But it backfires. Because when humans go to war, they take with them not just weapons, but memories, stories, lessons learned in blood. Every human soldier, the old man continued, carries the burden of those who came before him. Not just their victories, but their sacrifices, their losses, their pain. It makes us better soldiers, because it makes us realize the cost of war. The journalist was curious. Is that why humans view war differently than other species? Partly, the Admiral replied. Most species view war as a means to an end, a tool, or a necessity. We view it as history that has yet to be written. Every battle, every conflict, every war is a chapter in a book that began when the first man picked up a stone to protect his tribe. And we're still writing it, the veteran added, adding chapters, learning, and remembering. One of the students pointed to the news feed, where reports of the pirate incident kept appearing. That's why everyone reacted so quickly? Because of the memories, the Admiral confirmed. When we saw the refugee ship being attacked, we didn't just see the news, we saw every refugee ship that had ever been attacked, every innocent that had been harmed, every time someone thought they could prey on the weak with impunity. We remember, the old man said quietly. We always remember. But that's not all, the Admiral continued. We also remember every time someone stood up for the innocent, when species came together for a common goal, when mercy prevailed when violence would have been easier. The veteran showed his grandfather's dog tags. That reminds me of something important about human wars. We fight not because we love war, but because we remember what happens when good men do nothing. And that, the Admiral added, is why we train so hard, prepare so thoroughly, build alliances and share knowledge, because we remember every time we were unprepared, when we were too slow, when we failed to protect those in need. The reporter looked at her notes and then at the assembled group. So humans are gods of war not just because of how they fight, but because of how they remember, the old man finished. How we learn, how we carry the weight of every conflict, every loss, every victory, and every sacrifice. The Admiral stood up, adjusting her civilian clothes. That's why the pirates never stood a chance. Not just because we had superior numbers or better coordination, but because every man who responded carried the memory of every time someone tried to attack the innocent and showed mercy to the survivors. And because we remember, the veteran said, we remember what happens when victory becomes vengeance and justice becomes cruelty. We remember because we must, or we risk becoming what we fight. The news feed reported that the last of the pirate ships were being escorted back to the starbase. The refugee ship was safely docked, and its passengers were being cared for by a multi-species medical team. You see, the veteran concluded, being gods of war is not about being the best at fighting, but about being the best at remembering why we fight, when to fight, and most importantly, when not to fight. And when we do fight, the Admiral added, we carry with us every lesson, every story, and every sacrifice that came before. It makes us better warriors not because it makes us stronger, faster, or more skilled, but because it makes us understand the true cost of war. And that understanding makes us more terrible in battle and more compassionate in victory, the veteran concluded. The student silently absorbed this information. The reporter looked at her notes, realizing that she had enough material for not just one article, but an entire series. Behind them, the people in the bar began singing again, but this time it was different. A slow, sad tune about poppies growing in fields where soldiers had once fallen. The journalist realized, people are gods of war not only because of how they fight, but because they never forget why they fought and what it cost them. The bar was bustling, the pirate incident had drawn a crowd, and the journalist observed a group of younger aliens, students by their markings, gathering around an elderly human wearing what appeared to be some kind of ceremonial uniform. Unlike the active military personnel, his uniform was adorned with aged metals and weathered insignia, hinting at conflicts long past. Is it true, one of the students asked, about the Great Memorial? The old human's eyes crinkled at the corners. You're wondering about how we remember our wars. The journalist found herself drifting closer, datapad in hand. This was an aspect of human warfare she hadn't considered, how they preserved their martial history. On Earth, the veteran began, there's a wall. A simple thing, really. Black stone, polished to a mirror finish. On it are names, just names. Tens of thousands of them. People go there to touch the names, to make rubbings on paper, to leave flowers and medals and letters. But why? A young sentinel asked, why remember the dead this way? Because every name has a story, the old human replied, every single one. We don't just remember our victories, you see. We remember our losses, our sacrifices, our mistakes. That's another thing that makes us different. The Admiral from earlier appeared silently, taking a seat nearby. The old veteran nodded to her in acknowledgement before continuing. Most species build monuments to their victories, statues of great generals, memorials to decisive battles. We do that too, but, he paused, taking a sip of his drink, we also build monuments to our failures, to our losses, to the cost of war itself. But why? Another student asked, why remember defeat? Because that's how you learn, the Admiral interjected, that's how you make sure it doesn't happen again. Every name on that wall is a lesson, written in blood. The old veteran nodded. We have a saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But for humans, remembering isn't just about facts and figures. It's about stories, emotions, connections. He pulled something from his pocket, a small metal object on a chain. This belonged to my grandfather. He fought in what we call World War II, just one of millions. When I was a kid, he didn't tell me about the victories. He told me about the friends he lost, the horrors he saw, the cost of war. That seems counterproductive, one of the students observed. Wouldn't that discourage warriors? The admiral laughed softly. You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it has the opposite effect. Because when humans go to war, we don't just carry weapons. We carry memories, stories, lessons learned in blood and fire. Every human warrior, the veteran continued, carries the weight of those who came before, not just their victories, their sacrifices, their losses, their pain. It makes us better warriors because it makes us understand the cost of warfare. The journalist's antennae twitched with interest. Is that why humans seem to approach warfare differently than other species? Partly, the admiral said. Most species view war as a means to an end, a tool, a necessity. We view it as a story that's still being written. Every battle, every conflict, every war, they're all chapters in a book that began when the first human picked up a rock to defend their tribe, and we're still writing it, the veteran added, still adding chapters, still learning, still remembering. One of the students gestured to the newsfeed, still showing updates from the pirate incident. Is that why everyone responded so quickly? Because of memories, exactly, the admiral said. When we saw that refugee ship being attacked, we didn't just see a current event, we saw every refugee ship that's ever been attacked, every innocent that's ever been harmed, every time someone thought they could prey on the weak and get away with it. We remember, the veteran said softly, we always remember. But it's more than that, the admiral continued. We also remember every time someone stood up to protect the innocent, every time different species came together for a common cause, every time mercy was shown when vengeance would have been easier. The veteran held up his grandfather's dog tags. These remind me of something important about human warfare. We don't fight because we love war, we fight because we remember what happens when good people do nothing. And that, the admiral added, is why we train so hard, why we prepare so thoroughly, why we build alliances and share knowledge, because we remember every time we weren't ready, every time we were too slow, every time we failed to protect those who needed protection. The journalist looked at her notes, then at the assembled group. So, humans are gods of war not just because of how you fight, but because of how you remember, how we learn, the veteran finished, how we carry the weight of every conflict, every loss, every victory, every sacrifice. The admiral stood, straightening her civilian clothes. That's why those pirates never stood a chance. Not just because we had superior forces or better coordination, but because every human who responded carried with them the memories of every other time someone tried to prey on the innocent, and the mercy offered to the survivors. Also because we remember, the veteran said, we remember what happens when victory becomes vengeance, when justice becomes cruelty. We remember because we have to. Because if we forget, we risk becoming what we fight against. The newsfeed showed the last of the pirate ships being escorted to the starbase. The refugee ship was safely docked, its passengers being cared for by a multi-species medical team. So you see, the veteran concluded, being gods of war isn't about being the best at fighting. It's about being the best at remembering why we fight, when to fight, and most importantly, when not to. And when we do fight, the admiral added, we carry with us every lesson, every story, every sacrifice that came before. It makes us better warriors, not because it makes us stronger or faster or more skilled, but because it makes us understand the true cost of warfare. And that understanding makes us both more terrible in battle and more merciful in victory, the veteran finished. The students absorbed this in silence. The journalist looked at her notes, realizing she now had enough material for not just one article, but an entire series. Behind them, the humans in the bar had started singing again, but this time it was different. A slow, mournful tune about poppies growing in fields where soldiers had fallen long ago. The journalist understood now, humans weren't just gods of war because of how they fought, they were gods of war because they never forgot why they fought, or what it cost.